Welcome everyone, our viewers or listeners. We're glad to have you aboard for this conversation, Synod 2024, the implications for Canada. This video is being put out by Towards CRC Canada, which is a group of members in the Canadian side of the Christian Reformed Church who are saying it is time. It is time for the Canadian CRC to in a sense, move out of the parents' basement at our somewhat advanced age and strike out on our own in new ways. And that we'll be talking about what that can look like, and especially how what's on the agenda for Synod this year can have some real implications for Canadian ministry. We'll start with some introductions. My name is Everett Vanderhorst, and I am one of the two pastors at Meadowlands Fellowship Christian Reformed Church in Ancaster, Ontario. And I've been a part of the Towards CRC Canada group since, I guess, it started late last summer. Rita.
I'm Rita Klein-Geltink, and I'm pastor at Grace Church in Cobourg. That's part of Classis Quinte on the north shore of Lake Ontario. And yeah, I too have been part of this group, this Toward CRC Canada, since its inception, and finding it rather fun and have great dreams for the future.
Gord.
Yeah, my name is Gordon League. I am currently the chair of the church council at St. Albert Christian Reformed Church. And I've been with Towards CRC Canada since late last summer as well, when my former pastor, Bruce Adama, lassoed me and said, "You're the kind of guy for this organization." So I have been retired for 5 years. I was an investment advisor with RBC for 31 years prior to that. So happy to be here.
Okay, we're happy to have you. And Lee.
I'm Lee Holar. I'm retired, having been the director of the Society of Christian Schools in British Columbia for the last number of years, a transplanted American in the Canadian context. I am a member, vice chair of council at Hillside Christian Reformed Church, where we have been founding members there. I've also had the privilege of serving on some earlier denominational committees, which explored the place of how we might better function as a binational church, and some of the questions that have emerged along the line, and have dealt with some of the personalities who have served in those leadership capacity for a number of years. Look forward to the conversation.
Okay, very good. And just for viewers who may be wondering, my church is in Classis Hamilton. Gord's church is in Classis Alberta North, and Lee is in Classis BC Southeast. Yeah, it's once again we have a very thick agenda for Synod for delegates to wade through, and for ardent fans to read through as well. Thought it would be good to start with kind of a sleeper issue, something that probably it may not get a whole lot of attention, but there is a recommendation that is coming from the Council of Delegates to extend the current denominational ministry plan. So it's the sort of a denominational ministry plan for 2020 to 2025, and the recommendation is that that be extended in its present form to 2030. Yeah, we've had some conversations about that. Does anybody want to start off our conversation?
Last night at our elders meeting, so our consistory meeting, I mentioned some of these topics of conversation and how we're looking at the agenda for Synod through Canadian lenses. And so I tossed out the ministry plan item, and I asked anybody around the table if they knew what was involved in that ministry plan. And I'm guessing you all know the answer. Nobody knows. So let me just say this. First of all, so disappointing that there's, you don't pick up anything Canadian in that ministry plan. But I just want to say on the bigger picture is that you would think that with the Christian Reformed Church coming up to what could be a very watershed synod, that the ministry plan says nothing about envisioning what could happen after Synod 2024 and what our goals and our aspirations are going forward. It's like ignoring everything that's happening. And I just think that is really very sad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I would add too that one of the things about that denominational ministry plan, and I don't have it right here in front of me, but for those who aren't familiar with it, there's not a whole lot in it to object to. I mean, you mentioned that there's nothing particularly Canadian in it. Well, there's nothing particularly American in it either. It's so broad and so open, if you will, to try to be generous, that really any sort of initiative would kind of fit under it. And so part of why it's disappointing, I think, is that if you look back in our history, there have been a couple of times, in particular, there was an initiative led by the Canadian Ministry Director at the time, Bill Veenstra, in which Canadian members, were consulted, and there was a gathering that took place. It was in the early 2000s, and a very, very robust Canadian ministry plan came out of those consultations. So on the one hand, we've demonstrated that it can be done. There was a follow-up plan actually a few years ago too that it involved Canadians from all across the country. But both of those plans, and the Veenstra plan in particular, was shelved because of it didn't quite fit into there wasn't enough sort of a binational focus to it. So they said, well, what we need is a binational plan. And so all of that great work wound up, in a binder on a few shelves, and it's been gathering dust ever since. Were either of you, any of you a party to those conversations, or remember how those went back in the day?
Oh, certainly I do, and because it shaped the conversation, and there was a follow-up from those meetings where every class has had a meeting with Ben van de Zende or representatives of the committee or classes to consider how we might implement it. And it was a time of some real excitement, and it was, as happens often when there's a decision made to have some gracious space. The Canadians seized upon that, and they said, let's use this space now and kind of leave the governance issue alone and let the churches be churches and be as flourishing as they can be. And that was truly a time of some animated conversation. Yeah, but that seems to all have dissipated, and we haven't had many of those gatherings lately. So, as was mandated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is mandated to have them, not the.
Right. Yeah. Well, and oh yeah, go ahead, Gord.
Just by way of contrast, in business, we had 5-year business plans, all the time. And, those business plans had signposts and things and objectives that you had to reach. And you would always go back and you would look and test against that business plan. This, to me, again, I have not seen the entire document, but it seems to me if there is no plan and it is that easy to just say, let's extend this, then what's in the original plan? How have they done so far? Have they had success? Has it been an abject failure? Those are the questions you should ask and explore before you say, well, let's extend this we'll double this. We'll make this a 10-year plan. Like, that makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, the COD report, I'm just quoting from what it says in there. It says that the current plan fits well in the present context, whatever that means.
Yeah,
I suspect
go ahead, Lee.
I suspect that present context is kind of pregnant with meaning, with everything else that is going ahead. But the analogy, as Everett mentioned in the introduction, was, it's perhaps to consider the relationship and moving out of the basement, so to speak, and to encourage in the flourishing and the flourishment of the church is to encourage independence and autonomy, and to move toward a more independent CRC. How might we do that? And I see some of the current structures, including perhaps with continuing this plan, is something that will kind of put a lot of things on hold, if not stifle. And there's a Tugulu quote that says, "The fence has devoured the garden." We put protections around to keep things, to ensure that the inside stays kind of safe and wholesome. But in the end, the fence becomes an enclosure structure, and the trees we planted around now grow so much shade that the garden can't grow. And I think that's perhaps an analogy here as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and I mean, it also assumes that the context is what North America, I guess. And part of what we've been pointing out is that there are significant cultural, historical differences between Canada and the United States, and so they each require a different ministry approach. Um, and actually, for those, again, for viewers who are interested, we do have on our website, and we'll put the website address down below at the end. On our website, we do have a working document on contextual ministry in Canada, and making a case for the differences. Well, moving along, another perhaps not well known matter that's on the agenda is, and it was highlighted in a recent Council of Delegates report, that Synod is going to be receiving a report intended to serve as a guide for classes that are negotiating denominational affiliation with churches outside North America. So some of you may be familiar with that there are conversations that have been happening between, I think, Classes Central California, don't quote me on that, and a group of congregations in Venezuela who are negotiating perhaps these Venezuelan congregations becoming affiliated with a Christian Reformed church in North America. So right at the time when we're saying, hey, contextual difference requires that perhaps we look at a distinct Canadian CRC. There's a sort of a global push on the denominational leadership side to say, no, let's start adding more countries. Thoughts on that?
This one just blows my mind. I don't know. I had so many thoughts running through my mind when I encountered this. I was in one of those churches in California for a conference at one point, and was hearing about the excitement of these churches starting up in Venezuela. Got the impression that it was kind of, nurture them along and then set them on their way, and celebrate that, and wouldn't that be beautiful? And so when I read this, it kind of goes, what? And you know what came to my mind? It's maybe a little crazy, but I thought manifest destiny. Remember that? That was this concept that said the U.S. is divinely ordained to run the show with all of these things, and to take over and to enfold them into themselves. And so when I see them doing this with the Venezuelan churches, I think, well, what is that? Is that saying that only the US of A knows how to do church properly, and the CRC in the US, not CRCNA, because Canada has been enfolded into that as well, right? So that's the one thing that came to my mind. And then as I read this, I thought, why is this so difficult for the Canadian churches to have their own identity? Why is that so? And maybe some of you can answer that question, but that just puzzles me. why the CRCNA, instead of celebrating this, saying, yes, it's time for Canada to move out of the basement, time for you to do this at home. Why is this so difficult? Why are we running up against a wall all the time on this one? Those are some of the thoughts that come to my mind. I have more, but that's where I'll stop for now.
Well, I appreciate the fact that if the Venezuelans approach us and says we would like to be in deeper fellowship with you, it's like somebody says, we're striking up a friendship, and there's something wholesome about that. But in many, that's not opportunity for me to say, you lucky people, we can do so much for you. But in effect, it means you join us. In many ways, it's like a friendship. If it's healthy, you encourage that flourishment of the other. And it seems to me you're right that whether it's the Venezuelans or anything else, there's something neat about being asked to be in fellowship. But let's use that as an opportunity to say, yeah, let's look through our lens and say, wait a minute, how might we do this? Our history, including the way we've dealt with the Canadian context, is say this might be a new way of looking at how we just our church internationally, or how we can be church internationally.
Yep. Well, and there are a number of things that are striking about this, and I need to sort of hats off to Paul Vanderklay, who he posted a lengthy reflection on this that I think was posted in CRC Voices that has been making the rounds a bit. But yeah, it's just striking that as a denomination, we have been wrestling with the binational sort of character and how that actually works on the ground in terms of relationships. How do decisions get made when one particular national context, Canada, is in a minority position when it comes to synodical decisions and in the past the allocation of resources, et cetera. We would argue we have not been able to sort that out. We have not been able to do that well. There are documents going back to 1957 for our denominational centennial that called for, a separate or a distinct Canadian CRC or more breathing space and an ecclesiastical assembly in Canada, perhaps a regional synod. And even with all that history, there are some who are imagining, oh, we ought to be adding more national context to the CRCNA, denomination and synodical deal. It's extraordinary. I feel my feelings are a little bit hurt, that we've been kind of talking about this and they're going in the opposite direction. Yeah. Anybody else on that matter? It's the other thing that's striking is that if I'm reading this right, they're sort of suggesting that each classes be open to reach out and negotiate relationships with national churches. And it's like, wow, can you imagine the chaos that would, centralized, input on those conversations. That's not going to be sufficient to keep that from spiraling. I think I would say to the Venezuelans, hey, take a look at the field guide to the CRC in Canada on the Banner's website. That could be a helpful read.
I love Lee's word, the international CRC. Sure, have the CRC in the Philippines, have the CRC in Nigeria, have the CRC in Haiti, have the CRC in Venezuela, have the CRC in the US, have the CRC in Canada. Isn't that a better model? I think that would be an exciting model to use.
Yeah, and what a rich communion, family context that could be.
Mm-hmm. Where everybody is gathered as siblings, right? There's no big brother at the table, but each one is there, with its own voice and its own, perspective and story of how God's been working in their midst.
Yeah, maybe have a gathering every 5 years or so of all of them. Wouldn't that be fun?
Sure, sure, yeah. Well, of course, the big ticket item at Synod this year, as it was last year and the year before, and in a whole lot of discussions and conversations and delays, um, with the COVID pandemic, is that collection of overtures and communications that are connected to the adoption of the HSR, the Human Sexuality Report in 2022, including confessional status, on the prohibition against same-sex marriage, although technically it is a prohibition against same-sex sexual activity. Um, uh, so the agenda again is filled with overtures in all directions on what we ought to be doing with these matters, and in particular, I think where the discussion has advanced or stalled, I guess you could say, based on the ending of Synod last year, is on what do we do with gravamina, this um, process by which if someone is an office bearer in a local council, they can submit to their council a summary of their uh, uh, objections or perhaps their struggles with confessional and creedal documents, and then it is up to that local council to decide whether or not uh, um, they're okay with that member continuing to serve uh, with those concerns. And there's all kinds of writing that's going on about, how are we to understand the original intent of gravamina or a gravamen. But anyway, it's a big part of what is going to be on the agenda. And again, I want to sort of start with you, Rita, given that you had a a significant role directly in these matters when you were a part of Synod last year in in your role in your advisory committee. Do you want to maybe just give a little bit of a summary of the role that you had and kind of what you saw, and take it from there in terms of what you see your concerns are for the future?
I was on what you call advisory committee number 7, and that was the one that looked at uh, how to deal with the human sexuality report and this whole confessional status piece. So there were a number of things. There was a whole list of overtures that came to our advisory committee, and there were a number of us in that advisory committee that we took the approach that said, we will accept, and sometimes, holding your nose and accept, everything, as long as we can keep the confessional status piece out of it. And say, so that in other words, we'll accept and adopt the human sexuality report as long as we don't give it confessional status. And that was the minority report's recommendation. The minority report did not get to the floor of Synod, didn't even get there for discussion. So it was adopted to have confessional status. You'll notice that since then, and I've only scrolled through the overtures of this Synod, but it sure looks to me that there are no Canadian churches that are asking for the gravamen process to have that sunset clause. No Canadian churches are asking for that. On the floor of Synod, a number of people could not, in good conscience, stay there, and yeah, they walked off the floor of Synod, and most of those people were Canadians. And I think our our COD, they're doing the Canadians a big disservice by not noting that there is a huge divide here in terms of how Canadians are looking at this issue versus how the American churches are. And it brings me back. Well, maybe I should just stop there and let others speak, because I have a few other thoughts on this. But I just find it's very disappointing I really get the feel that we need to head for another Reformation. You've probably heard that saying before, that the church, the Christendom, goes through a Reformation every 500 years. And so we're at that point again. And if I look back at the 5 solas of the Reformation from 500 years ago, I think we're missing out. I think we are so caught up in, we're stuck on scripture alone. The Bible's clear on this, which isn't.
Mhm.
But where's the grace? Where's the faith? Where is in Christ alone? And I think that's what the Canadian churches are feeling, that we're missing out. We're doing this wrong. This isn't where we should be. Anyway, yeah, I was there. I will be at Synod again this year, not as a delegate, but because I'm serving on another task force that's reporting. But I will be watching this and I'll be praying.
It seems to me we have to reappropriate the term that came from an earlier synod where we were going to develop a gracious space. Now, gracious space meant there's room for dialogue, there's room for within the communion of God's people to come at these issues differently, but we come together seeking understanding, seeking honest conversation. And it seems to me we've lost some of that interest in working together to find a way forward together. And it seems to me that's one of the issues why we need to look for more independent CRC in Canada, because the way the movement is advancing, at least it appears in the Acts of Synod, there's another majoritarian uh, uh, position that may come forward with a very heavy hand, which is contrary to, I believe, everything it means to be the Church of Jesus Christ, and to allow for conversation and flourishment, honest flourishment. And it seems to me to be a movement toward rigid hegemony, and which harkens way back to one of the committees I sat on in 1995 that says, well, we have to be one church, we have to be unified, that appearance of unity. And even then, I think I recognize we should have been more intentional at that time already to encourage the growth and for the youth to move out of the basement.
Gord, you mentioned that you are currently serving as a chair of a local council. How do you see this, this affecting the local church? Is this just, a bunch of denominational, muckety mucks making decisions that don't really have any feet on the ground, or does this actually matter?
Uh, while Lee was talking, I was thinking about our own local situation, and maybe just do a very brief history. But we have gay members in our midst, and so we took up this cause last fall and engaged the entire congregation in listening circles, much debate around the council table, and were confronted by a number of people in the congregation in the way of a letter demanding literally that we should stop talking about this. Synod has spoken, and fast forward, after going through this whole process, council did decide to accede to Synod's decision, in spite of much opposition to that. That was the decision for the unity of our congregation, and that was the only way our congregation was going to survive. Well, the interesting thing that's happened subsequent to that is most of these conservative, I'll just label it as conservative members, have left the church. They left our congregation. And so while most of the council over the past year is decidedly affirming, the lay members who were against council even bringing this up for deliberation have fled. And so here we are now, here we are, it's near the end of May. We're looking for new members of council. I've had personally a couple of people that we have approached say, you know what, I'm looking at the agenda of Synod, and there's no way. I said, that why would I join this or put my name forward if in 6 months I'm going to be out. And literally that could be 80% of our church council if this goes through. So the question that we constantly, or the comment that is constantly being made, is why is this happening? We didn't ask for this. Our voice is not being heard. And I'm convinced, and that's why I'm here, I'm convinced that it would be decidedly different, a different conversation, a different tone, and likely a different outcome should we do this in Canada on our own. We didn't ask for this, and here we are in the midst of this, and our very future, which was, we revisioned a couple of years ago. We were going to rename the church. We were going to hire a pastor for discipleship and outreach, and all of that has just stopped. Can we get past this? I don't know. God only knows if we get past this. But with what I read for the upcoming agenda for Synod, if even even half of those what I would call draconian overtures pass, then I think there's very little hope for our church.
Well, and I do think we need to be transparent enough to recognize that certainly not, it's not the case that every member of the CRC in Canada or even every congregation or classis is fully dissatisfied with the adoption of the HSR, or at least parts of it. What we've said on our website in the wake of the kitchen table conversations that we hosted late last fall was that we as sort of as a group of people, we can't dictate what a Canadian CRC would look like on this matter, but we have great confidence that the discussion itself would look a whole lot different if it took place on our, as a Canadian church in the Canadian context. So some of the measures that we've seen at previous synods, where there's going to be a timer countdown on your comments, a prohibition against telling stories, and just, I would say, a sort of a general level of disrespect and a lack of love in the course of the conversations. I think we've said that, much of what we see in terms of how this conversation is taking place, and it is a difficult conversation, seems to reflect sort of a cultural war that's taking place mostly on the other side of the border in the United States. And that's simply, it reflects values that are not dominant values in Canada and in Canadian society, and also, I would say, in the generally speaking, in the Canadian Christian Reformed Church.
And the call for conversation is also the call for humility in that conversation, as opposed to if you come with theological doctrinal hubris, and I believe that's the direction you go when you make something confessional, because differences are not matters of salvation in this case. It's differences are in the family of God, are places for conversation and enrichment, and we ought to welcome how the Spirit may speak to us. And so that hubris only brings further brokenness and division, as Gord has mentioned. And I'm aware of another classes, but hearing it firsthand, they're wondering why they would almost entertain a motion to do away with classes, because it says, even there, it's become a battleground, and the ministry, as Gordon has mentioned, is paralyzing ministry in his church, but it's also paralyzing ministries in different classes as well.
Yeah. Yep. You know, the the way that this would play out should the Gravamina, um, 6 month sunset clause at each ecclesiastical assembly level, would play out is that basically you have a, a synod, um, which is three quarters American delegates making a decision that dictates who may and who may not be put on your nomination ballot as office bearers in your local Canadian Christian Reformed Church. And we're saying that that is an overreach. We know our people, and we know our contacts, and we know the ministry that God has called us to do. And so Canadian churches need to have our own conversation, our own very hard conversation about these matters, and to do that in appreciating the mosaic sort of approach to how it is that we are a nation together, rather than more of a melting pot approach that calls for uniformity.
I live in British Columbia, and we have a number of forest fires which are raging at the moment. One of the dangers is what can a unexpected wind do, and I'm mindful, particularly of this Synod meeting, when there's particular south of the border, there's a very strong wind blowing. That it's the overflow from the political civil religion kind of mindset, which is, I believe, shaping a lot of church conversation, if not just mindset, either implicitly or explicitly.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's worth noting that our people and those who are sort of on board with what we're calling for. We're not calling for a big beautiful wall, on our southern border. But to your point, Lee, maybe what we need is a firewall. A clearing of space so that the sparks and flames don't take hold on
Yeah.
our side, or that the results of the fire don't damage the ministry that we're trying to do locally in our own context. All right, then just one last kind of perhaps a minor point, but it was also noted in the Council of Delegates highlights from May of 2024 that the Canada Board heard about a discussion that will take place on Sunday afternoon of Synod 2024, and that discussion will be for Canadian delegates, I assume, at Synod. We had had conversations with the denominational leadership on the Canadian side about what's needed is some ecclesiastical space, even if if we're not looking at a distinct Canadian CRC denomination. What about a regional synod? What about just a session at Synod this year in which the U.S. delegates can gather together and talk about U.S. matters that are common to them, that aren't necessarily, we don't need to be a part of that conversation, and then also a Canadian at the very same time, a Canadian session where the Canadian delegates, I think there's 45 of them this year, can get together and say, okay, this is what we're wrestling. Just sort of a 2-hour window, and this, this seems like a pretty feeble um, watering down of that idea.
I think it goes to Rita's comment about manifest destiny.
Yeah. And give some expression, intentionally or unintentionally, about just being dismissive of a particular call or invitation to have a meaningful conversation. It says, well, we're really not going to facilitate that. And it's an opportunity loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which makes it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, my thinking that this is not going to be a very substantial conversation, given the history of Synod Sunday being a time of rest for the delegates, a time of relaxation, So, the nature of the discussion on that Sunday afternoon with Canadians gathered together. Um, yeah, I personally don't expect a whole lot of um, you know, ministry significance to rise up out of it, um, lest
Yeah.
it be a whole lot of work.
Yeah, when I read it in the report, I thought, is this the item that the gathering we were talking about? Then I was thinking, where's the agenda? Where are the items that are on going to be discussed? Where's the representation? What kind of decisions are going to be made here? And then Everett says, no, that's no. And so it feels a little bit like a pat on the head, okay, here you go, we'll have your ice cream social. And I'm sorry, I think the gatherings, about the gatherings that are happening, right, with 5 classes in each gathering, we feel a little bit like that too, right? Where you get together and you have nice conversations, and we had a nice time together, and it was all lovely, but nothing is accomplished, nothing's decided, no direction is set, and it's all a rather disappointing exercise.
Yeah, Gord.
I'd just like to pick up on that because I just got the email for said gathering. What's it, building gathering or?
Just gathering.
Yeah, which will be held in Vancouver for the 5 classes, Alberta, 2 in Alberta, 2 in BC, and 1 in Pacific Northwest, the US, to be held in Vancouver. And the thing that struck me was, and it's, it was right up front that no cost, 10 to 15 delegates per classes, airfare, accommodation, everything, is covered. And I went, wow, that's a big chunk of change. And then somewhat cryptically, it says that it's being funded through foundations and private donors. And I, for one, would like to see a list of any private or foundation that gives more than $1,000 Canadian or American. I'm easy, but I'd like to see who in fact is financing this. For instance, if it is say funded by Amway, and we can connect the dots about who's all involved with that. Would I be wanting to be a participant in that just because of the optics? So my question now is, okay, so let's talk about this gathering. I find it somewhat ironic that it's taking place now in this environment. We've got fires everywhere, and we're talking about, well, why don't we just go to, as we call it, La La Land, and let's do a feel good thing. Like, I'm sorry, but we need everybody's undivided attention, because this is literally the future, our future as a church hangs in the balance. I don't need a feel good moment right now.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, this has been a robust conversation, and hopefully, it gets some attention. If you're a viewer and you want to know more about our group towards CRC Canada, we'll have the website listed there below. We also have a Facebook group as well that you can not just read about what's going on, but join in the conversation. It has at times been also a robust conversation there on Facebook. We are wide open about what we're doing. We're in the process of releasing some working documents for you to consider, and we're asking, join us, and in saying it's time. It's we've been in mom and dad's basement long enough. Let's spread our wings and fly. Want to say thank you to each of you, Rita, Gord, and Lee, for your participation. And we look forward to this conversation in various ways continuing. And of course, we will be keeping an eye on Synod this year. Thanks, everyone. All right, let me